Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner here at HFO Investment Real Estate. And today we're joined again with Chris Robinson of CKR Law Group. Chris, we've had here multiple times talking about property tax issues and topics, and so thank you again for coming.
You bet.
Why don't we, we talked a little bit about a little while ago about kind of the ratio changing of cities being able to do their own ratio. Why don't we maybe highlight that, because I know we discussed that.
Okay. Well, with regard to multifamily, the countywide CPR is 35% of market value.
Okay.
And in Gresham and Fairview, it's over 50%. So that's about a 40% differential in terms of the ratio that's being applied to new construction, newly completed multifamily projects. And so
for somebody that's not clear on how that's, maybe give a little background on what that means to...
Well, Measure 50 had to have a mechanism to bring new construction on the tax rolls in some kind of parity with existing other apartment projects.
Got it.
And so that's change property ratio, or CPR, is recalculated each year. And the trend has been down in Multnomah County, countywide. Maybe back in 13-14, it was about 60% of market value for new construction.
Right.
Last year it was under 33%. So a huge movement, which is in recognition that market values were increasing rapidly, much more than the 3% increase in assessed values under Measure 50.
Got it.
So just you do the math. Now we're starting to see a bit of a change. In 2018, the CPR for multifamily increased from the 32.97% up to 35%, which is a recognition by the county assessor, at least, that the market's plateaued and maybe fell back a little bit.
And that's for the whole county, that's all of...
Except for Gresham and Fairview.
Had the ability to go out on their own.
Right.
Okay.
And you could see that depending on... look at the legislature again. They may do this in other cities throughout.
So do other cities have the ability to pull out with?
They're kind of waiting. I think Gresham and Fairview are kind of the test tube babies, and we'll see how it goes. And but I think it's going to make it more complicated, certainly. And if a developer is not aware of the fact that a local city may have a different change property ratio, it could have a substantial impact on their internal pro forma that they're using to justify construction. Got
it. Okay. So when did Gresham put that in? Was it last year? Was 17?
No, it was this year.
So this is the first. So this is the first year where we're going to see this.
Yes.
Okay. And what's their justification for wanting to go?
They felt that they were being undervalued, and that their tax base was not being treated fairly, and so they wanted to look at more of their local market data points.
Got it.
Versus countywide, where you're looking at downtown Portland, which is granted maybe a different market than Gresham or Fairview. And so they just felt, let us look at our own market data and arrive at our own change property ratios, and so we can build our tax base.
So for you who deals in, you really won't see this till next year as they start coming out as to what the effect.
Well, we haven't had anybody that's developed in Fairview and Gresham call us yet. I think this is going to be something that we might see in the next couple of months, and certainly in 2019 as projects get completed out there and they're going, well, this is not what we expect.
Right. And does this go across the board on all product types? So multifamily,
yes.
Commercial, so it's everything.
Yes.
Okay. And then we think the other municipalities are just kind of waiting to see what happens.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
Right.
Well, that'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out.
Right. So in terms of the big picture, what we've seen in terms of trends is that in 2017, the assessor was more aggressive in their valuations, and by that I mean they looked at the data points and I think went to the optimistic data point on everything: rent, vacancy rate, expenses, and cap rate. So, for example, valuing new construction in 2016, they generally use 25% expenses before property tax.
Right.
In 2017, they dropped that down to 20%.
Wow, okay.
So that's a huge shift, and obviously impacts net operating income.
Yep.
And then they're using the low end of the market cap rate, so it's producing
Big valuations.
right. And their justification for that is they looked at some transactions like the Yard, which most people recognize as not being a market deal.
Right. Right. There were some circumstances on that buyer and that
Right.
transaction that made it a little
Right.
unique. Yes.
But there were also some other apartment complexes that sold that were in lease up, and they go, oh, see, it doesn't matter if it's not stabilized. People are paying a stabilized value. That was really an exception, and I think that market has totally gone away.
So, because you deal with the assessors a lot, I mean, do they see the changing of the tide and recognize that, or you always, as we used to joke around with appraisers, are always looking back 6 months, and everybody,
Right.
I mean, how long does it take the data points to filter through to when we start seeing changes?
Well, we all just change in the CPR from below 33% to 35% is a recognition that there has been a shift.
Okay.
There has been a change. What we, when we're having clients call us now, we're reviewing newly completed projects and their evaluations. And as part of that process, we get information from the county. What did you use for rent?
Right.
What did you use for expenses? What did you use for a cap rate? And have any of those parameters changed in relationship to the last couple of years?
Interesting. Okay. So then let's talk about like new construction, because that's, I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, in terms of, are there, for valuations, are there exemptions and timelines? If somebody wants to come and build, we've talked about, when do they come and get involved in terms of looking at the tax value? If somebody's uninformed in Oregon, or what they think, oh, I'll just wait till I get my final assessment. I mean, and we've talked about the reasoning not to do that.
We get involved, for many of our clients, we get involved before they even started construction.
Right, okay.
So we're looking at part of their due diligence and feasibility is, if we build it, what will we be looking at in terms of a tax burden?
Right.
So we help them formulate
That part.
that part of it. And then the new construction exemption, we do a lot of that, and it's a great program. It's available for all income properties, not just apartments.
Okay.
And what it does is that if you meet the requirements, you can get up to a 2-year exemption on the improvements. So all you're paying tax on is the land.
Got it.
And so that's a huge thing if you didn't have the exemption, you're going to pay a tax on the land and the improvements in the ground as of January 1. And let's say you have a $100 million project and you've got $50 million in the ground.
That's a big
you're 50% complete. You have a 6-figure tax bill and you're generating no revenue.
Right. So was that put in place to try to spur development?
Yes.
Right.
Economic incentive.
And do a lot of people not know that coming in?
I just met with people, had lunch with out-of-state client yesterday, and building an income property. And we talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and kind of an introduction. I said, well, do you know anything about the new construction exemption? They said no.
And is that not in other states?
Other states have something, but not very many. California doesn't have it. Washington doesn't have it.
Okay.
Washington has maybe incentives for affordable housing in certain cities, but
right. And again, this is not an incentive for affordable housing.
No,
this is an incentive.
The
not even an incentive. It just gives you the ability.
Apartments, retail,
okay.
Anything that's income producing, even a condominium project would qualify
For that exemption.
Right.
And it's up to 2 years. So for a large project, that's a huge,
right.
huge
Like you look
benefit.
at the convention center hotel, for example.
Right. Okay. So another thing that's come up a lot in construction is IZ, inclusionary zoning.
Yeah.
What is kind of your thought? I think we're coming up, we're about 18, 19 months now from the time it's gone in place. What are your thoughts after reviewing what's happened in the city for inclusionary zoning? I mean,
well, I think the consensus is that it's not working.
Yeah.
that it's not providing enough incentive to generate the construction or development of affordable housing. And it's actually kind of turned the spigot off.
Right.
So part of this review is, I think they're going to kind of revisit it, and I think it's going to change. How it will change, I don't know, but they very much recognize that it has not worked the way that they wanted it.
And are you having, because you deal with a lot of developer and builder clients, in terms of, are they kind of now sitting back saying, let's wait and see what the city's going to do before we start a new project? Or?
Well, I think you've seen, and I think there were a number of developers that testified in front of city council before they passed this. That said, if you do this, it will not be feasible for us to develop housing. And that's proven true. They're kind of sitting on the sidelines. There's some, but it's not the project. What I have heard is most of the affordable housing that's been permitted since IZ has been public.
Yes.
Public.
Yeah, there's
housing.
a couple developers that have done some affordable. They build kind of different kind of product. It's a small handful.
Right.
Which makes me think about, because again, you deal with a lot of the county assessors and how they do their valuations. Yeah. Do they have any voice at all with the people making policy in terms of like does the assessor ever get involved to say, hey, wait a minute, an evaluation, this is what's going to happen? Not really. They kind of separate up.
No, I think they're kind of siloed.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of interaction and saying, well, if you do this, this is what we expect to happen.
This is what's going to do on the valuation, which is going to back it out.
I think there's some counties that are kind of have an antipathy to exemptions, just generally.
Got it.
And especially if you go outside of Portland, you go to some of the rural counties that have a challenging tax base anyway. They are pretty sensitive about the exemption issue and probably would make that vocal.
Right, at that point. Okay. Yeah. Now, the other thing that's come up, I know we've got a couple bond measures in place. We had one affordable housing bond measure in the city. Metro has one now. What is your take on what kind of impact that's going to have?
Well, depending on what tax district you are in.
Right.
But I think what you could expect is something around $1.20 or $1.25 increase in the tax rate.
Okay.
So if you're in a tax district that already is at 2.5, then you could see a substantial increase. So, and I think the question is, just on the merits, is it really going to solve the problem?
Right.
And that's it's a different issue. But obviously, anytime you have a bond measure that's approved, it's going to increase the tax rate.
Right. Which we've got to factor in. And then now while you're here, I'll ask you too about something else that came in the tax code, I think it was last year, is opportunity zones.
Right.
What do you see with those in terms of
Well, it's really just an emerging program.
Right.
The IRS has either just or about to release the regs, draft regulations. And so, but people are very much looking into the program because what it is an incentive for those people that are looking at a capital gain. They can defer the tax on that capital gain by investing in one of these opportunity funds.
Right.
And they've identified, I think in Oregon, there are 86 of them throughout the state. Mm-hmm. And so you find a qualifying fund, and you have a capital gain, and as long as you reinvest in the opportunity fund, I think within 6 months, you defer the tax.
Yeah, they've got 180 days, similar to a 1031 exchange. I think it's 180 days to get it into the fund and get, and then I think there's a 3-year horizon at that point to get.
Right, this is supposed to sunset in 2028. Yeah. And so if you invest in an opportunity fund and then the fund sells the asset, even that gain is going to be mitigated depending on your holding period.
Yeah, now we've seen a little push in terms of looking for land and, and for opportunity. we're not really sure if it's going to work on existing multifamily unless it's a really extensive reposition or rehab in terms of the extra dollars that have to get in. But it's going to be, I mean, it's good to see them looking at ways to try to encourage, development. I would just kind of wish IZ Zone would have maybe thought that way as opposed to the other way.
Yeah, well, just going back to IZ or inclusionary zoning for a minute, I think you've seen a slower velocity of land sales.
Oh, most definitely.
And the price points have changed from the go-go days of 14, 15, 16.
Yes.
And so that's one impact we've seen. But one thing we have observed, and this kind of goes back to the first topic on the trends in terms of new assessments, is we saw on some major projects the county undervaluing the land. Not overvaluing,
really?
But undervaluing the land. Now, why is that important? Well, if you have, again, I'll use a $100 million project, that's the value the county's put on it, and they've got $5 million on the land when it should be $10 million. That means that you're paying tax on another $5 million of improvement value that's subject to the change property ratio. And so we have resolved some appeals looking at that land and improvement allocation. It's pretty important.
Was that not typical where though undervalued land and historic?
Well, I would say it was probably 75%. We observed that the land was being undervalued for newly completed projects, and we had the market data to support significantly higher value, and then produce tax savings that way.
And then once you do some of those, do the assessors come around and say, maybe, okay,
they recognize
and recognizing that that's an issue of
sometimes reluctantly.
What's what in terms of it's a very interesting year with what's going on politically in terms of Portland and the state, what we're seeing with a lot of supply. Kind of what's your horizon do you see with a lot of your developer clients looking forward?
Well, that's a loaded question, interesting question. I think a lot depends just on the economy overall. And you see the stock market in the last couple of days, you see some volatility. And I think if that kind of floats down through the real estate investment market, you see the impact at very different aspects. Lending, the availability of capital, risk taking, and if people are not sure of where things are headed, they're going to be more reticent about taking those risks. So you could see some impact to development. But the Portland metro area has some pretty good fundamentals.
Yes, still.
And so we hope that things continue to be positive. It's not going to be as robust. I think that in 19 we'll have another opportunity to kind of reset, see what happened in 18. We're almost through the year. And then 2020, some people say, well, 2020 is about when we should expect some kind of recession. And so you'll see that reflected in sales. You'll see in property values.
And on a tax standpoint, will they not see that till 2021? I mean, what's the timing behind? Not that we've had huge, we haven't had huge reduction in sales pricing, but is the assessor usually a year behind on that in terms of recognizing?
They're actually, I think, more just because they use some of the same resources we use.
Okay.
They're using CoStar, they're using maybe Yardi, and so they're more in real time in terms of the information. But sometimes what they're doing is they'll simply go to the property website and they'll see what the asking rents are and plug that into their income approach.
And then back.
And without looking at concessions, and that concession or effective rent has been a continuing bone of contention in our valuation appeals. Yes. Their attitude has been, this is just temporary. When you're doing lease up, everyone has concessions. That's just the way it is, but it's not permanent. Well, I guess with the amount of product that's been coming out of the ground and is still coming out of the ground, it's how long is temporary? Because this is going to be around well through 2019. Mm-hmm. And, there's significant, credit cards, free rent, no utility payback.
Right. Discounted of parking,
things.
All the little...
Right,
yes.
And more expenses on the marketing side.
Right.
And so it's not just during the lease-up period, it's after the property kind of gets stabilized, just trying to keep their tenant base because everybody else is offering very attractive.
And they're not able to get renewals. I mean, they're not looking at what tenants are renewing at.
That's my point.
That's the issue. That's kind of the data point. If you really want to see where it is, it's where's the renewal. And if, the renewals has, hey, your rent's here, but we gave you a concession here, and your renewal is somewhere between.
And that has a big impact on the bottom line because then you have a vacant unit.
Right.
You have the rollover cost of getting the unit ready for a new tenant, and then offering concessions to that new tenant. So it's been an interesting debate with the county on those issues.
And it'll be interesting to see if some of the things that have been talked about in the city get through, some of we got the relocation, do they factor in that added cost on that when they're looking at valuations? Because I know now we do have investors, plugging that in.
Yeah.
If I'm going to do an add value or I'm doing something, I've got to add in the cost of, what the relocation fee. The city gets their security deposit, criminal background, which is going to add a lot of layers of administrative on top.
Yeah, and I guess that it'd be interesting is what line item of expense do you put that in?
Right.
Is it just tenant rollover? You just put it in.
Right.
That would seem to make the most sense.
Right. Well, are they going to make that adjustment on the expense side? So it'll be interesting. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
You bet.
It's always great to hear and get an update. I'm sure we'll be in contact. And again, if you're in the middle of construction or looking about that, get Chris involved early. Like I said, it's not something you want to wait till to the very end. You want to get involved early in terms of what's the estimate's going to be and how you deal with that with the city.
Two things we didn't cover. One is the appeal deadline for the 2018 assessments is December 31st of this year. And the other is on that new construction exemption, the appeal application deadline is April 1. Okay. So if you wanted to apply for 19,
April 1's got to be your...
April 1, 19 would be your deadline.
Got it. So I think the assessments have come out on the taxes now, so you should have that. And again, Chris is the one to talk to for looking at doing an appeal on that. So Thank you again for having it, and good to see you. And we'll see you next time on HFO-TV.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.